The blizzard rose like a living wall, swallowing sky, and rode together without mercy. Helen Dawson leaned forward on the wagon seat, knuckles burning against frozen rains, while the wind cut through her coat like broken glass. 3 days on the trail had stripped fear from her bones and replaced it with something quieter and more dangerous, a stubborn will to keep moving no matter what the storm demanded. Behind her, 9-year-old Jamie slept beneath thin wool, his narrow chest rising in shallow, rattling breaths that tightened her heart with every cough. The horse stumbled, steam bursting from its nostrils, and the wagon lurched as if the world itself had shifted sideways. Then came the sound Helen would remember for the rest of her life, a sharp crack splitting the howl of wind as the wheel shattered against hidden stone. The wagon slid, tipped, and stopped in a grave of drifting white. Silence followed, heavy and absolute. Helen lifted her son into her arms and turned in a slow circle, surrounded by nothing but snow and gray sky. Then through the storm's veil she saw it, dark and angular against the ridge, a house standing alone where no life should stand at all. It waited without windows lit, without footprint or sound, a silent answer to desperation, a last unmoving witness in a world that refused mercy yet promising shelter. Helen climbed the slope with Jamie pressed against her chest, every step tearing through her legs like knives of cold. Snow swallowed her boots, wind slapped her face raw, and still she moved because stopping meant freezing. The door yielded beneath her shove with a groan that felt ancient, as if the house itself were waking from a long, forgotten sleep. Inside, darkness folded around them, thick with dust, stale smoke, and abandonment. She struck her final match with shaking hands, coaxing fire from splintered wood as though pleading with the elements themselves. When the flames caught, warmth spread slowly, painfully, like blood returning to dead fingers. Jamie stirred, lips parting in a quiet breath that tightened her throat. That night, while storm claws scraped the roof, they huddled beside the stove, sharing the last of their food and every ounce of warmth. In the early pale light, Helen explored the home and discovered it had once been loved deeply. Carved beams, faded wallpaper, a portrait hanging crooked on the wall with a woman's gentle eyes frozen in paint. In the cellar she found the man who had built it, seated in eternal waiting with a wooden box locked tightly in his hands. Fear nearly shattered her, yet grief steadied her. She buried him beneath the lone oak tree on the hill while Jamie placed a tiny toy horse beside the grave, whispering that no one should wait alone forever. The box the dead man guarded revealed the truth of the house, and Helen read it beneath wavering lamplight while Jamie slept. Pages yellowed by time told the story of Alina, a woman who had loved deeply and suffered quietly until loneliness eclipsed hope entirely. She had not died by accident or illness. She had walked into the storm by choice, surrendering herself to silence when the world grew too vast and empty to endure. William, the man Helen buried, had spent his life guarding that secret, lighting the fire each winter as if love itself demanded duty beyond death. The house was not haunted by ghosts, but by devotion left with nowhere to go. That knowledge softened Helen in ways suffering never could. She opened the door to the living. A male rider arrived first, then a young mother with an infant, then a miner with a shattered leg. One by one, broken strangers found warmth within walls that once cradled only grief. Jamie called it the warm house, and the name spread along roads where hope traveled quietly. But peace never announces itself without testing the heart. On one storm-soaked night, the man who abandoned them returned, thin as memory and shaking with hunted fear. Robert, her husband, stood at her door with guilt in his eyes and desperation in his voice. Helen let him in not for forgiveness, but because she refused to let the warm house become another place where love was abandoned. 3 days after Robert's return, the shadow of his past arrived on horseback with death in its posture. Victor Hale dismounted at the gate with 2 armed men behind him, his presence heavier than winter itself. Helen stepped onto the porch without a weapon, without allies, armed only with the certainty that what lived inside her walls would not be taken. Hale spoke of debts, of pursuit, of relentless balance demanded by the world. Then, unexpectedly, he spoke of a brother long lost to gambling and despair, a family ruined by weakness, and a suicide that hardened him into something merciless. Helen listened, and answered not with fear but with truth. She told him that his vengeance had not restored what he lost, only multiplied the damage it once caused. Silence stretched until even the horses stilled. Then the warm house answered for her. Edgar arrived first. Then others followed, men and women Helen had sheltered, stepping forward not in violence but in quiet defiance. Hale saw what he could not conquer. He released Robert and turned away from blood. That night, Robert left again, this time not fleeing but choosing exile to spare the people he had already broken. Jamie touched his father's hand only once, uncertain yet brave. When spring finally came, melting snow into running silver, Robert sent a letter from distant docks where honest labor tried to heal old guilt. Helen placed it beside Eleanor's letters, two broken stories sharing the same silent box in a house that had learned how to forgive. Love returned to Helen's life without ceremony or demand, arriving quietly in the way Edgar never left. He fixed broken boards without asking permission to belong, delivered warmth as easily as mail, and spoke her name as if it were already home. One evening, as dusk spilled gold across the valley, Edgar shared the weight of losing his wife and the long years he believed life had ended when she did. Helen understood him without needing to explain herself. They did not promise forever. They promised tomorrow. Then came Abigail Crane, weathered by age yet fierce with memory, carrying the deed to the house her family had once built for love. Through tears she told Helen that what the warm house had become was what William and Eleanor once dreamed it might be. The celebration that night filled rooms that once echoed only with wind. Music rose from dusty keys, laughter stitched together losses, and Jamie read aloud from William's final letter, his young voice strong with borrowed courage. Seasons passed. The warm house became legend. Travelers found it when the world turned cruel and none were turned away. Edgar eventually stood beside Helen beneath the oak on the hill and vowed to stay as long as breath allowed. She said yes without fear because she no longer mistook solitude for strength. The fire always burned and the doors always opened, even when the road outside grew dark again. Winter returned many times after that first terrible storm, but it never ruled Helen's fate again. The oak above William's grave stood firm, ringed by wind and snow yet unbroken, marking a promise no season could steal. Jamie learned woodcraft beneath its branches, carving names as William once had, shaping patience from sorrow and purpose from memory. Letters from Robert continued through the years, each one carrying less shame and more effort until forgiveness became possible without erasing the past. Edgar aged with quiet steadiness, his once solitary roots replaced by a home filled with shared meals and growing laughter. Helen sometimes swore she could feel Eleanor's sorrow easing on quiet nights when firelight touched the walls just right. The warm house no longer waited in silence. It breathed with life. Children learned to walk across its floors. Widows learned to speak aloud again. Wanderers learned to stay. The world beyond the valley still carried cruelty, but those who passed through its gate left stronger than before. Helen began to understand that survival was not simply enduring the storm, but choosing to remain after it passed. Each scar within those walls told the story of someone who almost did not make it. And because of that shared nearness to the edge, gratitude became the deepest language spoken inside the warm house. It did not erase pain. It taught pain how to become something useful. Helen often wondered what her life would have become had the wheel never broken in that blizzard, if she had never seen that house rising from the snow like a stubborn heartbeat. The answer frightened her more than the storm ever did. The warm house was not born from success. It was born from failure, pride, fear, grief, and the simple refusal to lie down and disappear. Every soul who crossed the threshold carried the weight of nearly giving up. They left carrying something lighter. Travelers spoke of it in hushed voices as if mercy itself had chosen that hill as its dwelling. The years turned quietly. Hair whitened. Lines deepened. Memories softened. Jamie grew into a man who understood that strength was not dominance but steadiness, not volume but presence. Helen grew into herself without apology. On bitter nights when wolves cried beyond the valley and ice stitched silver into window glass, the warm house glowed like a promise that could not be extinguished. No one who arrived broken ever left forgotten. That became its true legacy. Not safety, not shelter, but belonging. The world outside remained uncertain, but inside those walls despair never ruled again. Even grief learned to bow its head. And when strangers asked why the doors never closed, Helen always answered simply that cold does not scare her anymore. It already tried once and lost. In the end, Helen understood the house had never truly saved her. She saved herself the moment she decided the storm would not decide her worth. Loss had not ruined her. Love had reconstructed her. The warm house did not erase suffering. It transformed suffering into meaning. Eleanor showed her how isolation can kill. William showed her how devotion can survive death. Robert showed her how broken people can still choose to change. Edgar showed her how patience becomes home. And Jamie showed her how mercy, once learned, echoes forward through generations. When her steps finally slowed, and she sat wrapped in quilts watching firelight roll across walls that once terrified her, she felt no regret for the storm, the fear, or the pain. Every wound became a doorway, and every tear became a seed. She no longer feared the end of her story because she had learned that endings are only thresholds disguised as goodbyes. The night air still whispered through the eaves.